Sometimes a memory is unlocked from somewhere so deep in the recesses of my childhood, something that even though it was once my entire world for years at a time, I'm stunned that I ever could have forgotten it. It's almost like the memory must belong to someone else, not just a younger version of myself, and that's the kind of dreamy, surreal nostalgia that I have for this movie. This movie is called Thumbelina, A Magical Story. I must have watched it hundreds of times when I was little, but as the years went on, I forgot about it completely. To be honest, it's not a great movie. What struck me on revisiting it, though, was that I seem to have unconsciously based my entire art style on this movie that I can't even remember. I didn't even think about it until I was scrolling through Pinterest at 3 a.m. one night and saw a picture of one of the characters and something was unlocked inside me. When I was 4, my nanny bought me this movie from Zellers, thinking it was the much-anticipated Don Bluth version of Thumbelina. I remember being mostly excited for that movie, but I think it had more to do with the charm bracelet that the VHS came with than the actual story. Unfortunately, this movie didn't come with any promotional jewelry, which is a real shame because I think there's an opportunity there. This movie was the first anime that I can remember watching, and because I was raised in a barren void of rural wilderness and didn't have cable, it got a lot of playtime. It blew my little mind and opened a big anime-shaped door in my childhood. So even though this movie was kind of mistakenly brought into my life, I'm pretty grateful for it. And that's why I want to examine it today. I looked for some information about this movie online, and I didn't really find too much, but I did learn that originally it was released in 1992 as a 26-episode-long television show that was cut up and re-edited by the distributor in 1993 into an hour-and-a-half-long movie. I assume that this was done to capitalize off of the Don Bluth Thumbelina that was released in 94, and though I couldn't find any evidence to back that up, it does make sense. The original director looks like he's got some really impressive credits, from Moomin to Card Captors to Tezuka's Metropolis, which leads me to believe that the original anime was way better than the movie was. From what I can tell, the Japanese voice acting does look pretty decent. At least the main voice actors seem to be more seasoned than in the English dub, which, to put it mildly, is very shrill. There's a lot of yelling and whining, but maybe that's just because I'm a withered old woman. It was a lot to take, though. This movie is more of a sequel to Thumbelina than an adaptation of the original Hans Christian Andersen version. The Don Bluth Thumbelina is actually more accurate to the fairy tale. The story goes that an old woman wishes for a child, and with the help of a magic spell or a witch, she manages to hatch a homunculus from a flower. All manner of creatures start chasing down this tiny woman trying to marry her. She overcomes all of the odds despite her size. The story of this movie isn't actually about Thumbelina at all, but about a regular-sized girl named Maya who gets page-mastered, or wishboned if you will, into the story of Thumbelina. At no point do any of the other characters even call her Thumbelina, or do they think that they're in that story, or are they aware that they're in that story. But a good witch tells Maya that she's in the land of her mother's dreams. So Maya's mother goes to her local witch because apparently her daughter's behavior is so out of control that only magic can contain her. And the witch's solution is to teach her a lesson by getting her sucked into a magical book and learning to overcome obstacles and to appreciate her single mother. I don't have kids, but I think I would have responded well to this kind of parenting. So our heroine gets sucked into the book, or the magic of the book shrinks her, but also sends her to an alternate dimension like Wonderland or Termina. The movie implies that her mother can't wake up, so I'm not sure if the mom gets sucked into the book as well. At one point, an evil frog gets scared off because Maya's cat is looking down at the book, but she's also kidnapped by those same frogs and then taken out of the window into an Oz-like dimension, which would make some movie sense because we did see that frog earlier. I think this confusion is equal parts me overthinking a children's cartoon as well as a whole lot of context that is probably cut out of the show to make it into a movie. So Maya is in the land of dreams, more specifically the land of her mother's dreams, but also in the story and book Thumbelina. She is told by a good witch that she has to journey to the land of the south to wake her mother up, and also along the way she has to learn some important lessons. Honestly, the story is kind of all over the place and doesn't really matter. Most of what happens are events on the road to a goal, a typical magical quest in an alternate dimension. I doubt I even listened to what happened in this movie as a kid. I just kind of sat in front of the TV drawing or zoned out, imagining that I existed in this world as well. It definitely awakened in me a lifelong love of all things tiny and miniature. As Maya is going through her quest to wake up her mother, she's being pursued by a creepy, intense frog family who want her to marry their son Hoppy. They address that Hoppy has to get married so young because frogs don't live very long, and they're given magic strawberries to turn Maya into a frog. These frogs are not playing around either. They've already booked the church and invited everyone they knew to the wedding. This aspect of the movie, while true to the original fairy tale, is something that I can really do without. The dad frog is just really creepy. I do like that rather than being just a villain, Hoppy, the frog who initially wanted to marry her, ends up helping Maya.
Dad, stop! Huh? Huh? Please let Maya go. She doesn't want to marry me.
I really like Hoppy, especially when you compare him to his toxic family. He has a little redemption arc and eventually joins the rest of the party. As much as I like Hoppy, my favorite character in this movie was always Noble. He's the Jiminy Cricket character, Maya's conscience. Out of all of the characters in this movie, I used to draw him all the time. He reminds me of a pastel sea monkey. He's a little fairy made of sugar, and he's always getting eaten or dissolved every time there's danger, poor guy. It's not all pastel and sugar, though. There are actually a fair amount of things in this movie that inspired some pretty memorable nightmares of mine growing up. I'm pretty sure this guy was my first sleep paralysis demon. But I guess you can even be nostalgic for the media that scared you as a child, because as an adult you realize that a magical adventure with magical problems and magical dangers are things that have clear magical solutions, and I guess in that way facing them feels more like an escape from the real adult problems that can't be solved with magical amulets, I assume. The rest of this movie, I kind of zoned out. Anime things happen, and spoiler alert, I guess, good triumphs over evil. I definitely remember the Crystal Prince, though. I had a serious crush on his shadow. Not the prince himself, though. That was important. He was a weenie. When the evil nightmare witch takes over the kingdom, he just instantly gives up. He does absolutely nothing and just looks really stressed out. He is literally completely dependent on a child to save him and his entire kingdom. One thing that I like about this movie is that it isn't a love story, and Maya isn't as useless as Bluth's Thumbelina, who is just kind of out there looking for Cornelius and her happily ever after. Maya's whiny, but she's an active protagonist, receiving magical powers and ultimately saving herself and her friends as she journeys forward. I guess as a little girl, Maya was a much more relatable character, and if I had to choose a world to live in and an adventure to go in, it would definitely be this version of the story. There's so much of this movie that still appeals to me in theory. I've always loved the idea of a world that can be dangerous enough for a good adventure, but where there's no trauma that's so great that a hot bowl of soup and a crackling fire can't soothe it. There's a scene where a kind mouse lady is making soup, and a weary Maya looks into her window longingly. I still remember desperately wanting a bowl of that soup as well. It looks really tasty. People always mention Studio Ghibli for delicious-looking food, but I've been chasing down soup this cozy since I was a kid, and really, what more could you ask for in a piece of art?
Good soup.
Do I recommend this movie? No, not really. Not unless you can find the original Japanese series. I really just wanted to revisit something that I used to regard as a comfort watch. I wanted to see if there was anything that could be salvaged that I could take with me. I want to make things that can one day be somebody else's comfort watch. So much children's media is made for a quick buck, and it feels like it was made for a quick buck because children's entertainment is such a lucrative industry. But I don't think this was made with that kind of cynicism. It was just mutilated and distributed that way. Aesthetically, I still really do love this movie. The cute character designs, the miniature worlds, and the dreamy 90s anime color palettes, but it's almost unwatchable with the sound on. I'd love a modern remake, but I honestly think that the best version of Thumbelina isn't Thumbelina, but Ghibli's Secret World of Arrietty, which I highly recommend and is currently on Netflix in Canada anyway. Maybe I'm just extra nostalgic for the gifts that my nanny got me because I miss her so much, but I realize how much I've adopted her pastel, cozy aesthetic into my own art, and I like that. I think that the real beauty of this movie is how much I treasured it as a little girl. I was starved for brightly colored magical worlds to disappear into, and this long-forgotten piece of Zeller's bargain bin cinema, far removed from its original context, could mean so much to me even if I never wanted to watch it again.
Well, Groven, it seems our little guests have been invited to a tea party with the hobbits.
I bet they're having fun. Hobbits are known to give really good tea parties.
Your love of the halfling's leaf has clearly slowed your mind.
Cool, crumb crisp coating.